Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. We will wait just a moment for everyone to join the session. Looks like we have people joining from all across the country today, which is so excellent to see. We're so happy to have all of you here. Okay, we will get started. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. My name is Charlie, and I am the graphic designer and marketing coordinator here with Charity Village. As we are gathering here on a virtual platform, it is important to acknowledge that each of us is joining this webinar from the ancestral or unceded lands of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people. As a settler on this land, I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. For those who may be joining a Charity Village webinar for the first time, Charity Village is Canada's largest online job board for the nonprofit sector. In addition to our online job board, organizations can also post volunteer positions. So if you're looking for work or to recruit talent in the sector, Charity Village is a great place to start. We also have a ton of excellent resources for nonprofit professionals, including online courses, articles, fundraising tools, and free webinars like the one we are presenting today. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to quickly run through some housekeeping items. You may have noticed that when you join the webinar, you are automatically placed on mute. Since we have hundreds of participants in today's session, it is very important for us to minimize the amount of background noise so that everyone can clearly hear the presentation. But you can still ask questions and make comments using the question box at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. Look for that at the bottom of your screen. Given the volume of questions that we received today, we invite you to include your email address along with your question. That way, if we do not get to your question, the Enkel team can reach out to you directly. We will be taking questions at the very end of the webinar, so please submit them as you think of them, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. You can also email your questions to webinars@charityvillage.com. If you happen to encounter any technical issues with the webinar, whether with viewing the presentation or with the audio, please let us know in the question box or by sending us an email. We will do our best to get any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as possible, but in a worst case scenario, please remember that we are recording today's webinar and we will send you the full recording by email tomorrow. So if you get called away or disconnected, you'll still be able to view the full presentation. Now, I would like to welcome our presenter for today, Omar Vizram, founder and head of growth at Enkel. Welcome, Omar.
Thank you, Charlie. It's so exciting to be with you here today. This is our final webinar of the year. For those of you that may have been counting, this would be our seventh webinar, and it's been a delight presenting to you throughout the year. Today's topic is preparing your nonprofit's finances for 2026, a roadmap to preparedness. For those of you who don't know us, we are Enkel. We help organizations gain clarity and confidence in their finances. I started Enkel back about 10 years ago, and today we serve 300 clients from coast to coast. We really think of our business as having two distinct groups, one being financial operations support, so that's bookkeeping, accounts payable, and payroll support, all of the transactional finance transactions that keep your organization moving throughout the year, and then financial management support through our CFO advisory and controllership services team. I would like to acknowledge that Enkel's offices, where I'm situated, are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We're grateful to live and work on these lands and recognize our responsibility to learn from and respect the Indigenous communities whose stewardship continues today. At Enkel, we're committed to ongoing reflection and learning as part of our journey toward reconciliation. And for those of you who don't know us, I'm Omar, as Charlie mentioned, Omar Vizram, founder and head of growth of Enkel. Prior to starting Enkel about 10 years ago, I worked in public accounting. I am a chartered professional accountant. And I'm joined by Shirley Wolf, who is also a chartered professional accountant. Shirley is a CFO who works with many of our clients on the not-for-profit side, supporting them with budgeting, cash flow planning, board issues, and a variety of different ongoing financial matters that nonprofits face. Just a quick summary of what you will learn today. So you will learn about scenario planning and budget preparation for uncertainty, internal controls to safeguard against fraud, risk management, key compliance areas for 2026, and finally, building board capacity for financial preparedness. Now, we're going to jump into our interactive polls and just a couple of notes before I dive in here. These two questions, these next two questions that I'm going to ask you, are very important for us as they will help us figure out the best content to deliver to you next year. Please keep in mind that this information is 100% confidential, but again, it would very much help us with planning for next year. So the first polling question is, what is your organization's approximate annual operating budget? Is it one, under $250,000, two, between $250,000 and $1 and $500,000, three, between $500,000 and $1 and 1.5 million, four, between $1,500,000 and $1 and $3 million, five, between $3 million and $1 and $5 million, and finally six, greater than $5 million. Really interested to see your responses here. Just give everybody a few more seconds.
Are you able to see the results, Omar? Would you like me to read them out
Yes.
for you?
Yep. Nope, that's okay. I'll go ahead. Okay, so we have 23% of our audience under 250,000, 17% between 250,000 and $1 and 500,000, 23% of our audience between 500,000 and 1.5 million, 14% between 1.5 million and 3 million, and then 7% in the $3 to $5 million range, 18% over 5 million. This is great. Very well distributed, which is really nice to see. So we have people joining us from organizations of various sizes. Thank you. And moving along, how many employees are on your organization's payroll? One, none. Two, under five. Three, between 6 and 10. Four, between 11 and 30. Five, between 31 and 50. And then six, over 51. Just let these get up there a little bit. Great participation today. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So we have 11% is none, 29% under 5, 14 between 6 and 10, 21% between 11 and 30, 7% between 31 and 50, and 18% over 51. Thank you, everyone. Moving along, let's get started. Okay, so just to frame why we're talking about what we're talking about today, just to really summarize what we see in the current landscape and what Canadian nonprofits can expect going into 2026. Ultimately, the sector continues to face unprecedented challenges, and this really demands proactive financial leadership. On the left-hand side here is a stat that I think is very important that I read recently from the Charity Insights Canada project that notes that 31% of Canadian charities expect a deficit in 2025, while only 15% receive funding growth in 2026. This further reinforces the fact that there is a squeeze between rising costs and limited revenue growth. So that means that going into 2026, there will be more nonprofits in a financially precarious position. Funding uncertainty. So governments face budget pressures and shifting priorities. We've gotten a little bit of a taste of that this year. That is expected to continue going into next year. Individual giving patterns remain unpredictable post-pandemic. I haven't seen much data coming out of Giving Tuesday yet, but please do look out for that. It will be interesting to see where things landed. And competition for donor dollars intensifies across the sector. Also, an evolving compliance landscape. new data privacy regulations that are affecting donor information management. One positive data point here is that public trust in charities does remain high. It has remained high in 2025 at 57%, but we have to keep in mind that this trust is fragile. And then, of course, we continue to see changing reporting requirements at the federal and provincial level. There is overall a growing risk exposure. Technology is bringing a lot of opportunity, but cybersecurity threats targeting nonprofit data and financial systems is on the rise. There is internal fraud risk that persists and grows during challenging times, particularly for smaller organizations with limited controls. And of course, reputational risks can be amplified by social media and public scrutiny. The way that we will present to you today is really by thinking of five pillars of preparedness for your nonprofit going into 2026. I will start by covering scenario planning for uncertainty. We will talk about building flexible budgets to help you prepare for multiple futures, looking at best case growth, worst case growth, and perhaps your best estimates. Internal controls and fraud risk prevention will be covered by Shirley. Shirley will also talk risk management and regulatory compliance. And finally, Shirley will end with board financial governance to help equip your board with financial literacy and oversight to ultimately fulfill their fiduciary duties and guide you through these challenging times. Let's jump into strategy number one, mastering scenario planning for budget uncertainty. But first, another polling question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how adaptable is your organization's budget to unexpected funding changes? Let's see what you have to say. 1 would be rigid, as in we struggle to adjust. 5 being we are highly flexible and we can easily pivot. I'm interested to see what you have to say here. Right, the numbers are continuing to go up. Let's have a look here. Okay, so 11% are saying rigid, we struggle to adjust. 31% are at 2. So some struggle there. 35% are at level 3, so I would say moderate. 15% at 4, and then 7% at 5. That is great insight. Thank you, everyone. All right, moving along. So planning for multiple futures with scenario-based budgeting is important, but why is it important and what does all of this mean? Well, traditional single forecast budgets really assume a predictable future, and we know that going into 2026, we need to be flexible. Scenario planning ultimately prepares your organization for uncertainty by modeling 3 distinct financial futures. And I want to be careful in saying 3 distinct financial futures. There may be more than that. There may be a compelling reason to add a fourth. I was at a session yesterday hosted by Imagine Canada here in Vancouver, and there was a session on impact measurement where they really covered the power of storytelling. And I think that budgeting for multiple different scenarios is really part of storytelling and what the future may look like. So why does this matter? Well, most nonprofits historically have budgeted for one expected outcome, really leaving them unprepared when reality diverges from expectations. Scenario planning helps you build organizational agility. It helps you identify early warning signs that trigger contingency plans. It helps you reduce panic decision-making during funding disruptions. This is an important one here. It is really hard to make decisions about what expenses to reduce when you lose funding. But if you plan for it proactively, you engage all stakeholders, you have discussions around what may go wrong. Making these decisions will be far more efficient, and you will be able to more effectively rally the team behind those decisions. Third would be building board and staff confidence in your financial leadership, giving the organization the confidence that you have the foresight to plan for and you are prepared. You have the toolkit ready to go for the changes that might be coming through in 2026. And then enabling faster response when circumstances do change, tying back to that previous comment about it being emotionally challenging to make expense cutting decisions when things don't go according to plan, you will ultimately be able to move faster. So if we look at the typical three scenario framework from left to right, on the left, we have our best case scenario, the optimistic scenario. That's the one that really can help us inspire our teams and rally everybody together about what might be possible. Then we have our most likely scenario. This is your typical sort of baseline budget. And then we have our worst case scenario or our conservative budget. Now, just honing in on the middle here, your most likely scenario, this is really a situation where existing grants are renewed at current levels, perhaps modest growth in individual giving, but really what this scenario is probably saying is that there's not a whole lot of change. Ultimately, from a strategic perspective, in terms of response, perhaps you maintain current operations, pursue strategic initiatives cautiously given the environment. If we shift over to the left, and one comment I do want to make, by the way, is that what will drive these different scenarios is funding and probability that you feel that funding will be secure or at risk, or there may be opportunities for improvement. So if we talk about the best case scenario, make sure that the revenue assumptions are actually grounded in reality. Is it perhaps funding that you've applied for that you feel is a bit of a stretch to achieve, or maybe there's some new initiatives planned for fundraising? Whatever it might be, these should be grounded in reality. Now, if these great things do happen, you may have the opportunity to invest in capacity building, expand programs, but keep in mind that it's a good time to also build reserves. Now, going to the worst case scenario. This is going to be the most challenging scenario to develop, and I would say particularly on the expense side. So this final bullet point, your strategic response around cost reduction. This is a place where, as I mentioned, you want to engage all stakeholders. You may have some assumptions about revenue that is at greater risk. Have those conversations about what will happen if you do lose that revenue, what expenses will need to be reduced, and get everybody aligned around what that will look like. All right. So, in terms of putting it all together, getting your scenario planning in place for 2026, to some extent, this is common sense, but I think it is an important set of steps to consider when you're going through the budgeting process, and particularly when you're planning for multiple different scenarios. Remember that it always starts with people, get the right stakeholders involved, make sure you have conversations about the budget and what the necessary inputs and assumptions are. To some extent, review historical data. We have had ups and downs. We have had uncertainty over the years. We had our COVID years. So think about what happened in the past and how that might help us predict what is going to happen next year. Build three budget models, and I use three cautiously. Maybe it's more than that. Project revenue, expenses, and cash flow. Remember that, like with all budgets, you want to be able to forecast throughout the year. So look at what has happened to date and easily project to the end of the year so you can understand what, sustainability might look like for your organization. Define trigger points and responses. I think it's a good idea to also write these down in words. What are the different trigger points and how will we respond? And then make sure that that's reflected in the different scenarios. Monitor and adjust quarterly. Again, talking about forecasting, make sure that you're able to do that and use scenarios for strategic decisions. Test the strategies across all different scenarios. And Shirley, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Omar, and good morning and good afternoon to all the participants. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. So we're now moving on to our second strategy, which is on the important topic of implementing strong internal controls to prevent and detect fraud. But before we get into the topic, we have another polling question for you. This polling question is asking you to rate, again, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident you are that your organization's internal controls can prevent or detect fraud. I'm looking forward to your responses. They're still coming in. Great. So if we look at number 1, which is where there could be major gaps and risks, 6% of the respondents are in this category. 15% are in category 2, 31% in category 3, 37% in category 4, and 11% in category 5. So as I look at these results, I think there are many of you that are not confident in your current systems and internal controls, and there likely are some areas where improvements need to be made. So I have some interesting statistics to share with you about how fraud has impacted the nonprofit sector. So organizations such as MNP and Queen's University have conducted some studies. And the MNP report says that roughly 1 in 10 reported frauds between 2016 and 2024 occurred at Canadian nonprofits. And the average loss per fraud case was just over $27,200. This says to me that fraud doesn't only impact those large corporations. Increasingly, we're seeing small and medium-sized enterprises and nonprofits being the targets of fraud. And this is both internal fraud and external fraud. As Omar mentioned, we're certainly seeing an environment of heightened fraud risk factors, particularly given our current economic environment and also with the rapid development of artificial intelligence. And it's always good to stay abreast of how the so-called bad actors are using AI in perpetrating fraud. Not surprisingly, the most common type of fraud impacting nonprofits is asset misappropriation. So this was at 96%. And typical means of misappropriating of assets are through billing fraud, expense reimbursement abuse, check tampering, and also payroll fraud. I was recently aware of an organization that unfortunately lost almost $60,000. They were approached by an individual who claimed to be with one of their vendors. They did in fact owe money. There were invoices outstanding to that particular vendor. And this individual may or may not have had some inside information. But the amount was paid to the banking details provided by the individual who contacted the organization. There were certainly some red flags to be alert to, such as urgency, requests perhaps coming through right at the end of the week, demanding payment, and also the fact that additional payment details were provided. It's always good to be vigilant and to check with your vendor in these types of instances. What we've also noted is that smaller Canadian nonprofits seem to be particularly vulnerable to fraud. There may be limited number of employees in the organization, particularly in the finance function, and there may not be strong oversight and internal controls in place. And so this really creates an opportunity for individuals to perpetrate fraud. So we'd like to share with you just some practical steps that you can take to safeguard your assets, in particular your cash. So firstly is to conduct an internal controls assessment. So this would involve reviewing your current processes and internal controls and to identify gaps and where your organization could be vulnerable to fraud. Particular areas that you could focus on are the handling of cash, the purchasing and the payment cycle in particular, and also with payroll. Again, you want to ensure that there are appropriate segregation of duties in place or vigilant oversight where you can't achieve that. You want to make sure that there are appropriate approvals in place for all payments and review of reports such as payroll registers to make sure that employees are receiving the appropriate amounts and that there aren't any fictitious employees that could have been added to your payroll register. Another area is ensuring that there's proper authorization levels in place over all of your disbursements. We highly recommend that 2 signatures are in place for all approvals, or at the very least for expenses or payments of $1,000 or more. There may be instances where you want to have board approval over significant expenses as well. And you would certainly want to adjust that threshold based on your budget size. But at the very least, there should be one approver for payments that are $1,000 or less. Another opportunity may be to perform surprise audits. So there may be some concerns that you have with respect to particular programs that you're running or with particular types of transactions that are occurring in your business. And so making some surprised cash counts, for example, or reviews of program expenses or focusing on particular transactions could be helpful to actually detect fraud. It may also be helpful in preventing fraud if, for example, your employees become aware that these surprise audits do take place periodically. A whistleblower policy and process is often very effective in order to identify where fraud may be occurring within your organization. It's very important, though, to ensure that it creates a safe and anonymous channel for your employees in particular, so that they don't need to be concerned about any retribution. There also need to be proper processes to recipients who should be receiving the information and conducting investigations. And you would certainly also want to include your board or your finance committee in oversight of this process. Another very important area is to provide fraud awareness training. As I mentioned, this is a continuously changing area. You may find that there are new ways in which the bad actors in particular are trying to perpetrate fraud in the current year compared to any training that you may have delivered in a previous year. I would recommend that this training be delivered to all levels within your organization and including your board so that everybody can remain alert and vigilant because everyone plays a part in protecting your organization. Our next strategy is looking at risk assessment and monitoring and ways in which you can ensure that you are strengthening the process and actively monitoring these risks to protect your organization. There are essentially 4 steps in the risk management process. So the first step is to identify risks. The second step is to assess the impact and the likelihood that the risks may occur. The third step is to develop mitigation strategies, again, to protect your organization. And the fourth step is to monitor and review, because this is a continuous process. So let's have a look firstly at the first risk. You may be aware that the risk management function resides with both the management of the organization and with the board. So we recommend, as part of this step, reviewing the risks that you've identified in a previous year, taking the chance to review them to assess whether they remain appropriate, whether there have been any changes in the circumstances that may result in changes needing to be made to those existing risks, but also to identify new risks that may have arisen during the previous year or that you expect in the coming year. It's a good example. It's a good approach to actually hold a workshop, including relevant staff and board members in that workshop. You may want to review incident reports in the past, any near misses, and audit findings. So this would be in consideration of both external and internal audits that may have been conducted during the course of the year. Also keep in mind the current environment in which we're in. So both our broader economic conditions, but also the conditions that are impacting your particular sector. Also any legal or regulatory changes that may have occurred or that are going to be taking place in the following year. And also the competitive landscape. So as Omar mentioned earlier, we're finding that there is increased competition for funding dollars. And so being aware of other organizations that may be applying for the same funding. Some uncommon risks that we're seeing are loss of funding, leadership transition, particularly at the executive director or CEO level, and other factors such as reputational damage, legal liability, the possible impacts to your organization of a natural disaster, and then also those cybersecurity breaches that we mentioned. So the second step is looking at the assessment of the impact and the likelihood of those risks. So firstly, you would want to rate each risk, considering the severity. So should that event take place, what would be the impact on your organization? And there are a number of ways that you could approach it, but you could certainly categorize that in terms of low, medium, or high financial impact. But also do consider the operational impact as well. So this could be resulting in perhaps a temporary discontinuance of a program. So that is important, as well as assessing the actual dollar impact. Also look at the probability of occurrence. So again, you could be using categories such as rare, possible, or likely, or you could be assigning a particular percentage to it. So for example, you may assess that a particular event has a 60% likelihood of occurrence. And after you've ranked each of those risks, you then want to identify the high impact and high likelihood risks, because those are the ones that are going to require immediate attention and ongoing focus. Also, don't forget those high impact, even low likelihood events. The pandemic, for example, would have been one of those types of events that certainly had a very significant impact. So you do want to pay attention to those as well. We recommend creating a risk register in which you will identify all of the risks and also their ratings. And then step 3 is looking at the mitigation strategies that you should be putting in place. So essentially, there are 4 responses that you can have. Essentially, avoiding a risk, reducing the risk to an acceptable level, transferring the risk to a third party, or accepting the risk. So in avoiding a risk, you may, for example, decide to eliminate a particular activity, and maybe it's a particular program that is a particular high risk to your organization. Also, with the example of a particular program, you could perhaps transfer that risk to a third party as opposed to discontinuing that program altogether. You could also take measures to reduce risks by strengthening your internal controls to try and minimize the likelihood or the impact should an event occur. Another example of where you can transfer risks is through insurance policies. You may then choose to accept a risk if it's a low priority and a low impact type of risk. And then fourthly is assigning the risk owners to each of those risks that you've identified, and also regularly reviewing those risks. We would recommend at least on a quarterly basis, as new risks may arise during that period, and there may be a need to update both the risks and some of the mitigation strategies that you have in place. Continue to keep the board abreast of those top risks and how you are managing those risks. And then adjust your strategies as may be needed as circumstances change. So the output of this process would be a very robust risk register where you've identified risks, documented your assessment of the impact, where you've also documented the mitigation strategies that you have in place, and who is owning those risks and ensuring that there's active monitoring and mitigation steps being taken. Our fourth strategy is about staying ahead of regulatory requirements. As you're aware, the CRA in particular has very vigilant requirements around charities. These include the timely and accurate filing of the T3010. So essentially you have 6 months, and by that time you need to have filed the return together with your annual financial statements. You're also required to maintain your proper books and records, and ensuring that you're applying to other specific rules, for example, around political activities, and also any funds that you may be providing to non-qualified donees. Most charities are entering into grants, and those grant agreements will specify how you need to spend those dollars. And there's accountability both from a financial perspective as well as program delivery to the funder. So you want to ensure that there's active monitoring of both the financials and the actual program commitments that you're making under those agreements, and ensuring that you're not in a position where you've perhaps claimed ineligible expenses or conducted activities that are not within the framework of the agreement. You do want to be in a position where you're avoiding having to repay monies to your funder. Payroll and employees, of course, are a fundamental part of any not-for-profit organization as you deliver services to your clients. Employment standards are an important piece of legislation that you need to comply with. So we do encourage you to keep abreast of any changes to both provincial and federal laws. Data privacy laws are also extremely important. Not-for-profits generally collect significant amounts of data for both donors and clients in particular, and these are subject to stringent privacy laws. So you do want to ensure that you are compliant with those laws. We're also seeing increasingly threats from criminals who are wanting to launder the proceeds of crime. And so nonprofits need to also be vigilant about the source of large donations that they're receiving, and in particular cash donations, as nonprofits and charities in particular are being used to clean funds that are being earned through illicit purposes. And our last strategy is about building your board capacity. This is really foundational to the success of all of these different strategies that we've discussed with you this morning. That board oversight is absolutely key, as well as the decisions that need to be made at the board level to ensure that appropriate controls are in place and that risks are being effectively managed. So this really starts with providing training to your board. to ensure that the board members understand financial statements and key metrics for your organization, and that they're interpreting this information correctly, because it does form the basis for those key decisions. If you don't have a finance committee in place, we do recommend putting a committee in place. This is effectively a working committee of the board that tends to get into a little bit more detail than a board would, but nonetheless does operate at a governance level. These would be consist of members who are financially literate and would meet at least quarterly to review your financial statements and be prepared to brief the board at the board meetings. These committees would have clearly defined terms of reference, defining their roles and responsibilities and the authority that resides at the committee level. It's also very helpful as part of your financial reporting packages to have dashboard reporting. This could be a one-page summary of the key information that you want to highlight to your executive management as well as to boards. This would be visual and easy to understand information that would highlight those key performance indicators and budget variances, and also include some brief narrative. So we're moving beyond compliance to reporting on to be making the strategic decisions that are necessary within your organization. And so we want to ensure that the boards have the information that they need to ensure the financial sustainability of the organization, to be able to plan effectively for the future and to manage risks. So we want to connect those financial decisions also to the mission of the organization to ensure that you're having the impact that you want to in the communities that you serve, and to be able to protect the long-term financial health of your organization. And I'm now going to hand back to Omar for the next topic.
Thank you, Shirley. Let's wrap all of this up into possible strategies for 2026 success. So what we've talked about today really comes down to building complete financial preparedness framework. And that framework has 4 parts that really all work together. The first is planning and strategy. So scenario-based budgeting, as I covered, diversified revenue, and regular financial reviews give you the ability to adjust quickly when things change. This is what keeps you from being caught off guard. Second is compliance and governance, staying ahead of regulatory requirements and strengthening board oversight protects your organization's credibility and ensures that you're always operating in a position of trust with funders and stakeholders. Third is protection and risk management. So having strong internal controls, the right insurance coverage, and active risk monitoring safeguards your assets and reduces the chance that a single incident can derail your mission. And fourth is operations and technology. Modern systems and efficient workflows make everything easier. They improve accuracy and help you gain real visibility into your financial health. When these pieces all come together, you build resilience. You put your organization in a position where you can make confident decisions, respond to uncertainty, and continue delivering impact in 2026 and beyond. And the good news is that you don't have to do everything at once. Start with one pillar, build momentum, and layer in others over time. Every step strengthens your financial foundation. All right. Now, to wrap it up, I wanted to tell you about a way to get started. All of this may seem overwhelming. We've been working with a number of nonprofits over the past couple of months on these types of projects. And what we do is we create a personalized finance transformation roadmap. We will provide you with a comprehensive review of your finance function with recommendations on tools, workflows, processes, and control risks. What we do is we interview key stakeholders, so that might be the executive director, administrative staff, treasurers, etc. We will document the risks, control gaps, and reporting improvement opportunities. We will also document the results and practical recommendations with specific context to your organization. These won't be generic recommendations. They will be tailored for you and the challenges that you face, as well as taking into account the limitations that you have. And we will meet with you to debrief these findings in a report. What these reports will also help to do is bring one single document that clarifies the state of your organization's finances, and that can really serve as a starting point for your transformation. We are now booking these assessments starting in January 2026. They typically take about 4 to 6 weeks to complete. So please reach out to us if you would like to speak about having one of these assessments done. You can scan the QR code. You can follow the link at the bottom here. We will make this link accessible to you in our follow-ups. And also, we've prepared a guide for you, the Nonprofit Financial 2026 guide. It covers a lot of the details that we discussed today. Again, you can scan the QR code, follow the link, and we will also make this accessible to you after this webinar. All right, let's go into our Q&A. I will ask Charlie to come back.
Hello, hello. We have a lot of questions today, so thank you everyone for submitting your questions. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So the first question we have here, there's a few questions similar to this one. As a newer nonprofit, what are just the general things we should consider when budgeting?
Um, So that's a big question, I would say. You want to really think about what the organization is going to look like over, I would say, at this point, the next 12 months, revenue sources, as well as the relevant expenses that you expect to incur. This is, of course, hard because you don't have historical data. But I would say that start with the revenue side, look at what sources of funding you're anticipating to receive in your early days of operation, and use this as an opportunity to really think about what's possible from an expense perspective, but also to be, rational and reasonable about what you won't be able to afford. Shirley, do you have anything to add to that question?
I think perhaps a good starting point is just to really think about the types of services and programs that you're planning to deliver in the coming year. That really forming the basis, and how you're expecting to fund those programs. And then, as you said, really sort of then focusing on developing those revenues and expense budgets.
Awesome. Thank you for that. This was another question that we received several times. What do you recommend for a separation of duties when there is a quote unquote department of one for the finance area? So if there are two approvals required for payments and payroll, but only one person is responsible for recording transactions, payments, donations, etc. So I guess the question is there, what are the recommendations for separation of duties when there's only one person dealing with the finances?
Mm-hmm.
Shirley, can you take that
So
one?
my recommendation in those times, yes, absolutely. My recommendation in those types of services is that there has to be vigilant oversight of the work of that individual. The executive director would need to be involved in closely reviewing the work of that individual. As we're looking at the payroll side of things, for example, they would need to review and approve the payroll run and also ensure ultimately that the disbursement from the bank account is consistent with the payroll registers as well, because sometimes numbers can be changed after the review of the reports. And that's just an example on the payroll side, but on other areas, it's just really closely. I would, in fact, probably be reviewing the detailed transactions that are recorded in the general ledger or your accounting system each month and making sure that there's, you're understanding those transactions and that there's nothing unexpected occurring.
Thank
Yeah,
you so much, Shirley. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
disbursements,
Omar.
sorry, disbursements is an important one, and you can, of course, leverage a tool like Pluto that we've talked about in the past to make it really easy to implement that oversight. So if all transactions are being paid through Pluto, you can have an approver that receives, the approver receives one email with all of the attachments. And so there can be a review of all disbursements before they are made in a very efficient way.
Mhm.
Terrific.
And
Thank you both
perhaps
for
the
that.
one thing I can add to that is you can certainly also involve your board members. So, for example, you could have your treasurer being one of the approvers for payments in addition to the executive director. So, thereby ensuring that your bookkeeper is not involved in the approval process.
Absolutely.
As in, who should fraud be reported to if someone spots it?
I think we might have missed the first part of that question, Charlie. I think you cut out there. Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, so sorry. They were just wondering, when they come across fraud, who should it be reported to?
Mhm. I would say it depends really on the nature of the fraud and who perhaps the suspected perpetrator may be. Typically, with sort of whistleblower type sort of fraud, it gets reported into the executive director, and somebody on the HR side may be involved as well. But there should also be a mechanism whereby the reporting could be made to the board, and it may be a particular representative appointed by the board in the event that there may be concerns about the executive director. But it really would go to very senior people within the organization.
Awesome. Very nice. Another question in the fraud area. We have quite a few of those in the fraud area. What are your thoughts on cyber insurance as a response to fraud? Is that a viable option?
It is in certain instances, and it's definitely something that I would encourage you to have a discussion with your insurance broker if this is not in place. In the example that I gave you with the organization that suffered a loss of nearly $60,000, it was regretful that they didn't have cyber insurance in place. And I think had that insurance been in place, they would have been able to recover almost all of that amount that they lost. We know that insurance companies are paying close attention to this area. They may be very selective about the types of risks that they're willing to take on within the suite of risks under cyber. But having some coverage is really encouraged, although it may be somewhat costly to your organization.
Yes, just to add to that, because I've been through the process of buying cyber insurance. Um, there's a lot of due diligence done by the insurance company beforehand, which is understandable. And it is costly, but I found it was quite reasonable when considering sort of general liability insurance. And we did look at multiple options, and we did find actually significant differences in the pricing. So I would suggest, really shopping around there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Another one we have here is, can you provide an example of dashboard reporting and what KPIs could you recommend?
Ooh, that's a very general question. We actually did a webinar on January 30th, uh, almost a year ago now. I would actually suggest referring to that one. We covered um, a lot of KPIs that are very relevant to many charities and nonprofits. So if you're looking for a starting point, I would go there. That would be my recommendation. Shirley, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's a good recommendation, Omar. It's very comprehensive, and you could certainly then identify those KPIs that are most relevant to your organization.
That's great. We'll make sure to link to that webinar in the on the webinar page that will be sent to everybody tomorrow. So if anyone wants to check that out. All right, we have time for a few more questions here. With this kind of feeds into your last question. With IT and cybersecurity being very costly, do you have any recommended controls that organizations can implement when they can't afford to source third-party cybersecurity services?
I think many organizations do have some IT services that are delivered to them. So you may be outsourcing that, and a number of my clients do outsource that function. And so it would be good to have discussions with the IT specialists that you either have on staff or are outsourcing to have to get their insights onto how you can be strengthening your internal controls. They may be in a position where they can sort of try to hack into your systems, for example, and to see whether they are successful in doing that. There are also situations where, for example, they could act as somebody who's trying to sort of send emails with links that will enable them to be able to access sensitive data on a sort of anonymous basis, but sending that out to your employee group to see how your employees are responding and whether they're sort of falling for it or whether they are appropriately assessing this as a potential fraudulent email. So they can help you improve your internal controls.
Yeah, we've worked with a company called Cobalt.io. You can check them out. And they do a lot of this type of training and support. They have it sort of ready to go, and they've deployed it in other organizations. So that might be a good place to start looking.
All right, terrific. We'll do one more question today. Um, could you give an example of payroll fraud?
Yeah, so this may be in a situation where there's perhaps one individual involved and a lack of oversight on the work. So that individual could set up a fictitious employee, so it's somebody who isn't actually a valid employee, and have the monies directed to their own personal bank account. Or they could potentially be overpaying themselves or other employees in the organization.
Awesome. Thank you both, Omar and Shirley, for presenting such an informative webinar. We really appreciate it. Do you happen to have any final comments before signing off today?
Just a thank you overall to the team at Charity Village and for all of you who have joined us today and in past webinars this year. It's been a delight. Again, if we can support you in beginning that journey, you don't know where to start, perhaps you're having a hard time getting other stakeholders aligned on where to go, please feel free to reach out to us. That link will be available tomorrow, and we can help you with that initial assessment of your finance function to help you with that change and transition next year.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I just wanted to remind everybody that you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to this webinar recording. Please feel free to share this link with your colleagues. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar. You should also see that link pop up right here in Zoom following the session. And remember to check out our next free webinar, How Nonprofits Can Engage, Retain, and Report Volunteering at Scale. That'll be on January 20th, hosted by Rosterfi. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your year. We'll see you in the next year. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.